Good morning. This is the Angry Astronaut coming to you from Orlando, Florida, preparing for my trip to Cape Canaveral this week, and I have something special for you. Although many of us might think that the Artemis program has only been in process for a few years, the idea of getting the necessary information to establish a moon base at the lunar South Pole has been in process for a lot longer than that. What you're watching right now is an animation of the L-Cross mission, which took place in the summer of 2009. NASA scientists had long suspected that there was ice at the lunar South Pole, and so the idea was to impact the South Pole, as you can see right here, with a Centaur upper stage from an Atlas rocket. And then a probe spacecraft would fly through the debris created by this impact and see whether or not ice might be detected. And sure enough, this audacious and innovative mission proved to be successful, and ice was indeed detected, but something else was also found, and that's lots of different types of contaminants, things that will make this ice completely unusable to future moon colonists. So how do you extract the ice, melt it, and then remove the impurities all in one of the most hostile places in the entire solar system? Well, that's the job that's been taken on by the UK Space Agency and also the Canadian Space Agency, and they've kicked off something called an Aqualunar challenge. It's actually been in process for some time now, and quite a number of companies and scientific organizations have put forward their solutions for making use of water at the lunar South Pole. It's a good thing because without this project, NASA will not be able to exploit this ice, and therefore a moon base will undoubtedly fail. So today we're going to meet 4 of the competitors and listen to their unique solutions to this daunting problem. All of this and more coming at you on the Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon and welcome to a very special Angry Bulletin. Today we are going to be talking about the Aqualunar Challenge, and we're going to be discussing this with a couple of the competitors. And first today we're going to have Lola Naker. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that there, but if you'd be so kind as to introduce yourself to the viewers and what you do and what your company does.
Yes, my name is Lola Naker. I have a engineering, research and development company that's based in the southwest of England. We're technical generalists. We specialize in being active in a broad range of technologies, initially in consulting, but increasingly towards the development of unique technologies to solve problems, initially in space. And when the Aqualunar Challenge came up, it was the perfect opportunity to convert some of our knowledge in chemical processing systems and in space engineering into a system that could purify ice and turn that into drinking water in the south polar region of the moon.
So, as most of us probably know at this point, Artemis and the whole idea of getting established permanently on the moon is going to fall apart if we don't have the ability to exploit in situ resources, particularly ice. So, first of all, what sort of challenges do you anticipate facing, and how are you guys going to rectify that?
So this problem has been around for decades. I think people have been thinking about it since Apollo. And there isn't a clear and comprehensive solution for how to produce liquid water on either the moon or on Mars. So it's a difficult challenge for anyone undertaking it. We're tasked with providing a solution over 6 months with a small team and a small budget. So there's both the technological challenges and the budgetary and project management challenges of doing that. So I will be forthcoming and say that it is an extremely difficult challenge to solve in this time frame with this budget and with this team. So what we are aiming to do is deliver aspects of a solution that are sufficiently novel that we could win a further prize as part of this challenge and develop the technology further. However, in a chemical processing system that's operating in low gravity, low temperature, and low pressure autonomously in a foreign environment, which we have very little data about, is there are a number of separate challenges that need to be solved, different pieces of a puzzle that need to be solved, and these pieces of the puzzle need to be integrated into a functioning system. Our approach is to use a core technology called sonochemical degradation, which is the use of ultrasound to create cavitation within liquid. And these cavitating bubbles, they're microbubbles. They act as microreactors in which high temperatures, high pressures are produced, and they either crack a molecule or produce free radicals that act on a molecule, a contamination that's within the liquid water. This is a core part of our process, but in order to get that to work, you can think about it, we need liquid water. And how do we get to that? So they're wrapped around this core technology are a number of other technologies which work in coherence with it. And our approach is a system engineering approach to solve a system engineering challenge with this as a core technology.
Now, you talked about, there's a lot of things that we don't necessarily understand about the environment, about the ice in general, that sort of thing. And of course, you're probably aware of in fact, I'm sure there's no way you couldn't be aware of how NASA just canceled their Viper mission, which was supposed to go and look for this stuff and get a lot more information about it. I mean, how are we supposed to know what we're dealing with here if we're not going to be examining it? I mean, do you think Viper was an important part of that process, or is there another way that we can gain that information so you can do your job better?
I think about this all the time. What am I feeding into this system? How much of it is sandy, rocky? In what form is the ice? Is it adhered? Has it penetrated within pores in the regolith? We're going to have to make assumptions, unfortunately, and test out the process, considering a range of parameters. So a range of particle size distribution, of water ice content, of contaminant content. There are a number of other practical challenges of working with dirty ice, and that is the electrostatic charging of this material. So once it's brought into the process, it's going to tend to stick to walls. There's the low power available to deal with any particular processing that we're going to do. This is the South Polar region, so the sun stays on the horizon. But if you look at videos taken by NASA off the Shackleton crater, where we're supposed to be based, you'll see that there is no single point around the crater rim that sees sunlight all of the time. There will be some portion of a cycle where you're in complete darkness, and you're expecting the temperature to drop from a balmy 110 Kelvin down to 50 Kelvin.
Yeah.
So it's really cold. It's cold. It's a low pressure environment, and there's also low gravity to deal with. The gravity is probably the most challenging thing to design for, because there's a lot of chemical processing that, if you look at the theory, it has gravity embedded in the correlation. It's implicit. There's no extra gravity term that you can manipulate when you're manipulating these equations to try and design something. There's a lot of effects on fluid mechanics, surface tension, capillary action, condensation will be different, evaporation will be different.
So 2 quick questions come to mind from what you've just said to me. Number one, given the fact that solar power is never going to be totally reliable at Shackleton Crater, is a modular reactor the best solution, a modular nuclear reactor, that is? And then my second question is, if you had control of Artemis yourself and you had all the budget that you needed, how would you extract enough ice samples and get enough to examine to really get a good idea of what we're going to be working with before we actually go there with humans?
We're certainly limited to about 2 kilowatts with solar panels. That's the typical number. And of the processes that I'm looking at, that will give us a certain scale of operation on the moon. With 2 kilowatts, we can only process a certain number of liters per hour of water. So depending on the size of the base that's built, we will have to resort to other sources of power if they're located in the South Polar region. For our particular challenge, we are developing a demonstration payload. So I think it may be okay to operate with the 2 kilowatt cap, but certainly for human operations, we should be considering the nuclear option as well. The solution is part of a incremental development that has to be done. And certainly, even before the system that we're designing is flown to the moon, we will need a mission to characterize the regolith in the location of interest. So Viper was a good mission to do that. We do need something to be deployed on the surface, to be able to drill in different locations, to understand the properties of the regolith, the quantity of water ice that's available, before we can really deploy a chemical processing system like the one that's being developed in this challenge.
Now, if you feel comfortable in answering this, what sets your solution apart? Why do you think the UK Space Agency and the Canadian Space Agency will support your particular method of dealing with this challenge?
Yeah, so I have asked myself this question as well. What our approach is to take a very iterative, to go through a very iterative design process. We're building prototypes of increasing fidelity, starting with equipment I can buy off the shelf. And you may have seen an article in the news about me going off to the grocery store and buying a microwave. It needs the magnetron. The magnetron happens to work at a frequency that's ideal for water.
Right.
And well, we're trying to melt ice, or at least sublimate ice. So I'm using as many of the off-the-shelf components I can find, to create a first iteration of the technology, and then we'll understand what are the practical difficulties in working with a dirty ice simulant, and we'll do another iteration of increasing fidelity. But always our iterations consider a system approach. So we're not focusing on that chemical degradation process itself. Certainly we will aim to show that we can act on the contaminants of interest. However, that core technology is useless unless we can wrap it with other fluid processing and mineral processing technologies that can go from ice that I imagine looks like the kind of dirty ice you find in winter on the side of the road, the sort of mud mixed with ice, that sort of composition, to something that you're happy to drink out coming out the other side of the system. So we're taking a system engineering approach and working with iterative prototyping of increasing complexity.
I want to thank you very much for joining us. Sorry, I could talk to you for quite some time, I think, about these topics, but we have a limited amount of time for each interview and for each competitor, but I just want to emphasize that what you guys are doing is really important to the success or failure of Artemis. So I wish you all the best, and thanks so much for being willing to tackle this challenge.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Take care. Good afternoon, folks. Once again, welcome to this very special bulletin here on The Angry Astronaut. We are joined by another competitor from the Aqualunar Challenge. We have Philip with us today. Philip, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to the viewers?
Thanks, John. I am Philip Baldock. I'm a physics graduate and material science researcher with the University of Birmingham, but now I work with the British Interplanetary Society. We are essentially I think actually the oldest space advocacy group in the world. So when the British Interplanetary Society started up, there were no space programs. Space was the idea of going to space was just a series of talented young engineers drawing stuff out, sort of oftentimes in really nice paintings and things like this, like clever illustrations and ideas, and it just it grew from there. But we've always been sort of at the cutting edge, and we like to think anyway. So we tend to think about sort of larger scale plans for human space colonization and things like this. So really, it's a group of people who are enthusiastic about space and about what the future might hold for us, and we're just sort of working together, pooling our ideas, and seeing where we can go.
Well, fantastic. I'm sure I'm going to be very interested in what you have to say today then. Number one, what do you foresee are going to be the biggest challenges? And number two, what is your organization proposing? How do you intend to rectify the problem?
I would sum up maybe the lunar situation as follows. Imagine that you only get sunlight from one direction at a time, and it tracks all the way across the sun if you're at the pole, tracks all the way across the horizon over the course of about a month. But occasionally you get pitch black, and in a few hours you get to sub-zero temperatures, as in like cryogenically cold. So you have the choice of harsh radiation and extreme heat potentially, unless you're clever, or cryogenic cold, unless you're clever. You have dust that's of the worst possible kind. It's never seen water. So for billions of years, without the effects of water, which on Earth tend to make things smooth and round, they weather things. As in the Martian case, it's much softer there. The dust is horrible. Like everything is sort of spiky. Imagine sort of microscopic bits of dust that are horribly abrasive. They break things. So any joins you have, or anything exposed that you just sort of assume would be fine, probably won't be fine. And also, with the Apollo astronauts, their experience with the lunar dust has been, it's terrible for humans as well. So none of it can get to people. Obviously, it's like pure vacuum. So moving things in or out of a vessel, which takes out volatiles and so on, is difficult, because the vacuum will cause things to outgas anyway if they ever get above cryogenically cold temperatures. So it really is a place of extremes. But it's kind of I keep thinking back to the Dune novels. So that's by Frank Herbert. Mm-hmm. Like there, he talks a lot about Arrakis. So the storyline takes place on Arrakis. The Fremen who live there, they live in a very harsh environment. If you don't know what to do, if you don't know how to live on Dune. But they can adapt. Over time, they have learnt the tricks. There's like a certain way of doing things, and if you fall into that way, actually it's not so bad. But the harsh conditions mean that it's very easy to pick bad solutions. So like there's a small subset of things which make sense. There's like a rhythm to things, a set of rules, and if you stray outside of them, it leads to disaster. It's basically what I say the moon is like. These are the things we're supposed to see as problems.
Now, in terms of, you're talking about that. So is it true then that we don't know a great deal about the challenges that we're going to be facing? I mean, that's one of our biggest problems. We haven't actually extracted any real samples, aside from the L-Cross mission, I believe, the one where we had a spacecraft fly through the particles that were produced by an impactor. So, I mean, is that one of the biggest challenges? And if so, how do we get proper samples to analyze so we can come up with a better plan, especially now that NASA has canceled Viper?
There's likely to be some set of volatiles there that's unlike precisely what we expect. And the particular quantities of this or that chemical have yet to be confirmed. Now, one can simply look at that and say, like, well, okay, but we know roughly the sorts of things that might be there. So for instance, we expect that there are many sulfur-containing compounds, there's going to be ammonia there, and carbon-containing compounds as well. Depending on the proportions, depending on the precise species, and on the way that they are combined when you extract them, like when you sift them out, you separate them out, it may well be possible to make horrendously toxic chemicals that are water-soluble. And so you would have a tiny amount, and now it's deadly to the astronaut. So it would be very nice to know exactly what's there, and it would be very, very nice if it didn't sort of vary from site to site. At the moment, we're assuming that we're never going to get that lucky, and we need a system that's robust enough to make the best out of whatever we find, but that's careful not to cause circumstances to arise that might lead to disaster. That is, in particular, to the production of dangerous chemicals.
Do you have, given all the unknown factors here, and this is something I'm learning the more that I interview folks like yourself, do we have a strategy then? For example, one of these companies I spoke to are looking at using ultrasound to remove undesirable chemicals. Do you have a strategy?
Of course. I think that in our case, we're trying to look at what we're likely to have access to with ease, and what's likely to be very expensive and very difficult for us to use. And it's a different situation to what's common on Earth. So I think actually for us, we are looking to use a solar concentrator to do most of our heating for us, and then perform traditional distillation, but with chemical reactions being in the presence of catalysts and so on, being done in the background to further process the things that we get out. So it's going to be a one-step distillation followed by a series of chemical reactions to break things down. So the reason we think that's a good idea is that it's actually, the generation of electricity is actually not that trivial on the lunar surface, because you have to track the sun. So all your solar cells have to be sun tracking, and the energy efficiency of solar cells, it's possible to get very efficient solar cells, but they're extremely expensive. And there's lunar dust everywhere, they break everything and so on. So we think actually availability of electricity might be a big stepping stone to overcome. So we're looking to minimize input electricity and have a robust system that can especially handle abrasion and things like that. So in principle, a solar concentrator, if it's relatively big, because it's not running on semiconductors and things like this, even if it gets scratches and so on, it's only the scratch that doesn't work anymore. The rest of it's fine.
Right, interesting. So in other words, trying to take the electricity out of the equation, instead just using light, concentrated light. Very interesting. So that being the case then, do you feel that your solution can function on a relatively large scale? In other words, enough to, say, produce enough usable in situ material for 4 astronauts, for example, without the use of a nuclear reactor, a modular nuclear reactor? That's part of the problem that we seem to be dealing with, is the fact that the sun is not all that, you're not getting direct sunlight as much at the South Pole, so solar power, it's more difficult to produce energy. Do you think that what you're proposing can work without a modular reactor?
I am not a big fan of nuclear reactors for the lunar surface, especially at this kind of scale. Now, that's not to say that a nuclear reactor is not a brilliant piece of technology and very well suited to space, but again, it depends on where. Nuclear reactors are for the Martian surface. There it really makes sense, because there's not that much sunlight and you're trapped in a 24-hour day-night cycle with a lot of dust. So solar concentrators don't really work. So your bag of tricks is much smaller and the availability of ores is much greater. So what you really need is just lots of electricity, and a nuclear reactor does not rely on sunlight. You actually have atmosphere there as well, so you can boil off CO2 to get rid of waste heat. That's the place. On the moon, by contrast, you have a lot more sunlight, and it's a lot harder to get rid of waste heat. So to get a nuclear reactor working and working efficiently, there are other tricks, but a completely solid state system might work, but the efficiency will be terrible. So thermocouples, I think, is a few percent. For example, using a nuclear reactor the way we use them on Earth, one might expect to get up to like 30 or 40% efficiency, which I hope you would want to do. Otherwise, you have a lot of waste heat radiation problems. You need a gas turbine engine. You need a means of condensing and boiling your gases. So if using water, for example, there's loads of options for this, but all of them require lots of moving parts, lots of complexity. You have to have a waste heat radiator at the end. It's not a trivial thing. A nuclear reactor I've seen some proposals and it's just like 10 kilowatts or something like this of electricity. That's fair enough, but I mean, a nuclear reactor is a really potent thing. It's a bit of a waste if it's only 10 kilowatts, because in that case you should just use solar cells. I'm not a fan of it per se, but we think that solar cells, especially in the short run, so for poor astronauts, that kind of scale, solar cells make a lot more sense, given the restrictions that currently exist.
Let's say that you are in charge, right? And let's say that, in order to properly implement your solution, your strategy, whether it be solar collector, ultrasound, whatever, you're going to need more information about, what you're going to be working with, the ice, the impurities, that sort of thing. Without Viper, how do we get that information? Or do you think it's vital to bring Viper back? Or do we have something else planned that can do the same thing?
Well, sample return doesn't have to be that hard. That's the thing. So if I'm in charge and appreciating that the situation is always a lot more complicated than at first it appears, there's a lot of stuff going on, fair enough. I had never run a $50 billion agency before, cards on the table. But if I was running such an industry and I had free reign over where I could spend the money and so on, putting a small rover onto the lunar surface that drills in, in situ, picks up some material, and either does some form of spectroscopy, or better still, is able to scoop it up. Now, scooping it up is not trivial necessarily, because at the sorts of temperatures we're dealing with for frozen balls, that's probably harder than concrete.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a misnomer. It's stronger in compression than concrete. So actually scooping it up is not trivial. Fair enough. But in the grand scheme of things that we've been able to do in the past anyway, scooping up a bit of rock, putting on a little rocket, and then sending it back to Earth is not that hard in the grand scheme. I would set aside a little bit of money for this, and I'd let people, let private companies or other groups have a go at it, and give them access to space. And then if it doesn't work first time, it's not the end of the world. And I'd really encourage innovation. I'd say, it doesn't have to work first time. There's not people there. It's a tiny little, remote control car with a scoop on the end. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. So have a go and see what you can do. I want to empower people to do that as quickly as possible. I don't think it has to be like $5 billion for a rover or something like that. I'm not convinced. I think you could get something like that for a great deal less, and just bring the sample back, and we can work from there.
All right, last question. Sorry, I said last question. I lied. I got one more for you, and then we're done. And you've already kind of explained a bit about this, but what is it about your solution you think that's going to set you apart, that's going to get it to where the UK Space Agency and the Canadian Space Agency are going to pick the British Interplanetary Society for this solution?
Okay, so in our case, we're looking a little bit forward at what people are going to need, not just what they need at the first instance. So if you're setting up a space colony, we think actually the problem's a lot more sophisticated than at first it sounds, and our system scales up really well. So we have a system which requires very little electricity to run to actually get good results, and we have mechanisms, because we can be selective about what we're doing. It's not just like one approach for dealing with everything, or we'll break down the contaminants and then they're all gone. We separate them out. We treat different contaminants in different ways, depending on what they are, depending on the specifics. Because we're doing things this way, we can create really useful side compounds. And things like fertilizer, for example, that's actually not trivial to do, but there are chemical tricks you can do. If you know what you're doing, you can do that with what's reported, with what we think is there. We think, in practice, if you're going to start farming on the lunar surface, you're going to need things like fertilizer. You'll need breathable atmosphere. We think our hydrogen economy is pretty good. So the actual hydrogen that you get given out by a bunch of chemical processes that are no doubt going to occur. Forgive me for speaking in riddles here. I can't reveal what.
Sure, of course you can't say exactly how, but just in general. Yeah. So it's very scalable, you're saying, with a minimum amount of electricity needed to operate it. Yeah, that definitely sounds good. Once again, we have run out of time. I appreciate all the information that you gave to us. And with any luck, you guys will end up being the Kwisatz Haderach of the moon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Good afternoon, and we are moving on to our third competitor in the Aqualunar Challenge that we've had an opportunity to interview. We have a large panel of folks, a team that are participating in this event. Folks, would you be so kind as to introduce yourselves to the viewers?
Excellent. Thank you, Angry Astronaut. So my name is Edo Boek. We are a team from Queen Mary University of London. So I'm running the team at the moment, together with my colleague Professor Stoyan Smukov. So I've got a background in oil and gas research. I worked in the industry for about 15 years, and after that moved to academia. And I'm now no longer working on oil and gas, of course, for obvious reasons. So we've moved to green energy and sustainable drinking water. That's my main topic of research now. So together with Stoyan, I've been running a few projects that are relevant to space science. So we've asked students to design a plant to produce microalgae for biofuels for use in space. So we've got a bit of a background in space there, and we've got a background in water purification. So these two things together prompted us to apply for this competition.
Yes, the main thing I can say about myself is I have a very multidisciplinary background. I got my chemistry degree at University of Richmond undergraduate and Northwestern University. But then I've had a very multidisciplinary background, so I switched to chemical engineering after that, and I spent a number of different postdocs around the US until I finally got my faculty position at the University of Cambridge, where I spent 6 years at the Department of Material Science. And then, in fact, I was recruited, just like with Edo, to create this Department of Chemical Engineering at Queen Mary University of London. So a lot of the things I've worked on are artificial muscles, new types of materials that on a very simple basis exhibit properties as if they are alive. I've even worked on origin of life kind of issues, a lot of fundamental things, but a lot of practical things come down to how do we look at things at different length scales, and worked on microparticles, nanoparticles, and in this case it's about how to get rid of molecules that I think sometimes we are taking some standard approaches the way we teach and some non-standard approaches as well.
All right, and thank you very much. And to quickly, just to bring the viewers up to speed on our situation here, we actually have 3 other people participating in this conversation. I encourage all of you to contribute as we continue. So, number 1, what do you foresee are going to be the most significant challenges? Number 2, what are you folks doing?
So, one of the biggest problems in a way that is outlined in the brief is that not only do you have extremely low temperatures on the moon, which we are not used to. I mean, the temperatures on Antarctica seem like really balmy, exercises compared to what's on the moon, at least in the areas that we're looking at, permanently shaded, that haven't seen light for millions of years. But also, we're trying to do this without the kind of support network that you would normally have on Earth. So even if you have cold places, you always have access to extra instrumentation, extra things that you want to be able to supply extra parts if something runs out, a pile of something breaks. But that's not an option on the moon. So not only do we have very challenging conditions in terms of temperature and being able to run this processes that we're designing, but we have to make it completely foolproof. And as you know, anything in space that has to be foolproof might have to take back, technology even decades before, as long as we make it foolproof. Both in terms of computers being able to certify for radiation, other things like that. I don't want to say much more at the moment, but I think one of the things is just the fact that it has to be foolproof and remotely controlled and not fail.
So and I know there's only so much you can tell me, obviously, because you have to be fairly opaque at this stage in a competition. However, what I've heard thus far in generalities is one team is approaching this thing from using ultrasound to remove impurities. Another group is utilizing concentrated solar energy, heat and light, that sort of thing. Can you give us any generalities on how you guys intend to remove impurities?
So following on from Stoyan effect, we need a system that's foolproof. Now, on Earth, drinking water purification is a very complicated process. It consists of a train of treatment steps, maybe 10 or 15, depending on the different pollutants. We can't afford to do that on the moon. There's far too big a chance that one of these steps, something goes wrong with it. So we can't afford that. So we've tried to keep our process as simple as possible. So it's actually consisting only out of 2 steps. The first step is sublimation of lunar ice. We take out the majority of the impurities there and we recover them, taking into account in situ resource recovery. And then for the few that remain that are difficult to remove by sublimation, we apply a process called supercritical water oxidation. Now, this is a process that will destroy everything and anything that's in it. But this is a very difficult step. So this is the main challenge for us, I think.
Now, one of the questions that I didn't anticipate asking you folks, but has started to come up a lot, is the fact that we really don't have a lot of information on the ice itself, exactly what sort of contaminants, what sort of impurities we're going to be dealing with. And now that Viper has been canceled, NASA has shut down the Viper, it's going to be a lot more difficult for us to gather that information. Number one, how important do you think Viper was to what you're trying to do, and do you think it would be in our interest to bring Viper back? And number two, if we don't have Viper, is there another way to gain this information?
So we got our information about the pollutants, contaminants from the L-Cross mission. You're familiar with this, I guess.
Yes.
Satellites dropped, and then from the dust that comes back, an approximation is made of the contaminants. So we've been told this is the composition of the water you're dealing with. So that's fairly well defined. I'm not sure whether it's correct, but we've been told this is what you will work with. And that's a very nasty concoction, in fact. It's got concentrated ammonia in it, H2S, SO2, all sorts of organic components. So it's really nasty stuff.
Interesting. So, and actually, I didn't know that. So, you guys have been provided the parameters of the expected contaminants based on what L-Cross told you. Is your solution scalable and adjustable? In other words, if the contaminants end up being different, or if they want to say, okay, we don't want to just make a few liters, we want to make kiloliters, or tons of this stuff. Is your solution scalable and adjustable?
So the supercritical water oxidation step we are planning to do, and this is not going to be a batch reactor step. So we're not depending on, let's say, the size of a reactor. No, we are planning to do a continuous flow reactor, where we flow the water with the lunar ice into the system, and the clean water comes out. So that's a continuous process. So for this purpose, we're going to collaborate with one of the groups in the world that has got extensive expertise on this. And in fact, Farid, you see in the bottom right corner, is going to spend 3 months in the US working with this group and taking it to experiments, gaining experience how to build one rig himself, and taking equipment back with him for us to use in London. So that is the I think one answer to the scalability question.
Fantastic. Last question. What sets you guys apart?
I can be very brief about this. We are the only team of chemical engineers of the 10 teams taking part. Chemical engineers have common sense. So I think we are in a very good place to make a very practical choice there. For example, we know that on the moon, things like filtration, which is a very much used technique for water purification on Earth, won't be successful because filters clog, and then you've got to send somebody out to clean the filter, to backwash it. So we've avoided on purpose techniques like filtration. And I believe other teams may be less aware of the practical aspects of these treatment steps that we apply regularly on Earth.
Fantastic. Well, I'm very impressed with everything I've heard. You seem to have a very knowledgeable team, so I'm looking forward to seeing this contest continue to develop, and thank you very much for your time today. Good morning, folks. We are with our fourth competitor that we've been able to interview for the Aqualunar Challenge. Really looking forward to this. Sir, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yeah, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Interstellar Mapping. My name's Nicholas Barnett.
Well, very nice meeting you. Really appreciate it. Can you briefly tell me what your company does? What sort of business you're in?
We do moon mapping and modelling, and we build infrastructure to support the Artemis missions for the moon missions.
Fantastic. So you guys are doing a fair amount then for Artemis, we would think. So tell me then, this is a question I've asked pretty much everybody else involved with this process thus far. So number one, what do you foresee are going to be the biggest challenges with trying to make use of that ice? And then number two, how do you guys plan to meet that challenge that's unique and different from other competitors?
There's probably three. To limit myself to three main challenges, because there's massive issues when it comes to operating on the moon. Obviously, the first one is going to be the temperature influence. The next one's going to be the impact of the lunar regolith on any moving parts. So any moving parts will just get absolutely chewed up and destroyed. Imagine having bearings on a bike with no dust caps and no grease, and you're riding along the sand in the beach. As soon as that beach sand gets in, it's going to tear it to shreds. The third thing we need to be wary of is that the contaminants on the moon, so the hydrogen sulfides, the sulfur dioxides, the ammonias, the methanols that are contained there within with the water on the moon, the impact on the humans is actually quite severe, and so they can be quite toxic. I wrote a paper earlier in the year on that, and we found that around 0.01% of the ammonia is allowed to actually be present within the 0.01% of the ammonia within the regolith can actually be present within the water if we get 100% water extraction. So to address these three issues, we're looking at trying to encapsulate our system and maintain the operating system, where the body of Suez, is what we call it, is going to be in a controlled environment. So it's going to be in a constant temperature throughout the entire lunar day and night. The other issue, no moving parts. We have designed it so there is zero moving parts within the entire system. So it's a completely static system. And then obviously the third part is trying to eliminate those, try and remove all the toxins. So we have a two-stage process. The first stage removes anything that could be contaminants and issues for astronauts. And then after we've removed that, then we go into the water extraction process. Admittedly, the third one's going to be a massive challenge.
Yeah. So removing the contaminants, there have been a number of different approaches that have been laid out to me thus far. Some people are using ultrasound. Some people are using purely chemical reactions. What I know you can't tell me too many specifics, obviously, but what in general, what is your general strategy in comparison with those types of approaches?
Yeah, so we're using like a distillation process, so more of a differential heating system, trying to heat it to a point, remove the contaminants, and then raising the temperature and removing the water. So we're looking to get that and hopefully trying to get the purity that we require.
So in terms of the information that you have thus far as to what contaminants are actually present, you're getting that I understand from the L-Cross mission data. Now, it's possible that there are other contaminants that we don't know about yet. Would missions like the Viper mission prior to its cancellation have been useful to somebody like you to gain more information, or are there other missions coming up that will do the same job that Viper's doing, in your opinion?
Oh, mate. Oh, Viper would have been lovely. Absolutely lovely for us. I'd say because we only have that one analog, and with the Chinese releasing data earlier in the week or late last week regarding how they found water in an area where it was that we didn't perceive it to be there. That was their Chang'e 5 mission, I think it was. So it'd be interesting to see what they got out of their Chang'e 6. But any mission where we can actually get better analogs, because we're really only using one analog. And I come from oil and gas background. Having only one data point is not very great to go off. Like I have seen a lot of I've spoken to a lot of people in the industry regarding what could be present in the moon. There is a huge amount of stuff that could be present, and how these contaminants exist may not exist in the purity, in the form that we believe they exist. They may be in a larger molecular structures, so they may be stable. You never know.
Well, yeah, so it sounds like that would have been so in your view, if there's a way to get Viper back on the books, that would be very beneficial to folks like you. Is that what I hear you saying?
Oh, mate, yeah, 100%. More ways than one, we'll put it that way.
Yes, no doubt. So you're also involved in mapping the moon and such. I don't know how many particulars you can give me on that, but what sort of geographic challenges do you foresee are going to exist with our attempts to explore the lunar South Pole compared to the places that the Apollo missions went in the past?
So we're more in the South Pole is more of a highland structure. Now, the interesting thing is that it depends on how you look at it. So if you're half glass empty view, then you're going to see all the challenges as big challenges. If you look at it with a half glass full point of view, then you're going to see it as opportunities. So you have very low temperatures in the South Pole, which is caused by the cratering and everything. Now, if we look at that and go, okay, what can we use in that? What is a big challenge on Earth that then becomes an advantage on the Moon? Can we utilize that moving forward? So it's really our perception as to how we see that those problems or perceived problems. And so we go, okay, and this is what we're trying to do with interstellar mapping, is that we go, okay, let's use this to our advantage. How can we build the best products using that environment? Where have people really complained about low temperatures, abrasive materials, etc.? And my background being a rural background and having worked in the oil and gas sector in really remote places in the world, we need to operate by ourselves. Like we don't have supplies coming in day in, day out. We have to try and be self-reliant. Otherwise, we just don't operate, and we have livestock die. We can get ourselves into trouble ourselves. So we need to remove a lot of the high-tech gadgets that creates more dramas. So the more you have, the more jewelry you have, the more things you're going to lose, right? If you strip that all off, you're going to have less things that go wrong, less things to. So that's our philosophy on that, and I think it actually provides a lot of advantages. Like, look at the cold temperatures. Supercomputers need cold temperatures to operate. You have the superconductors can operate down there with you don't need to cool them. They just sit there on the ground. You have the peaks in the highlands. You have the nearly unlimited supply of solar power. Like, let's look at them and go, wow, this is a cracking environment. let's really give it a good shot. I think it's actually a better environment than the Apollo mission sites, because you have that massive day-night differentials. Oh mate, I envy anyone. I don't envy anyone going to the Apollo sites and operate there and mine in that situation. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be an extreme challenge for whoever decides to do that. Well, sir, you've actually, Nicholas, you've given me a pretty good impression, I think, also as to what distinguishes you from from some of the other competitors when the UK Space Agency and the Canadian Space Agency makes their decisions as to who they're going to give these awards to. It sounds like simplicity, the fewer the moving parts, the better, the fewer things that can go wrong in a hostile environment like the lunar South Pole. Is there anything else you'd like to add as to the advantages that your solution provides?
I think the company as a whole, we can provide a holistic view for the UK Space Agency, because we do have the mapping technology backing behind us as well. So we can look at the strategic sites which are stronger, better, and have far more opportunities than maybe what our competitors might be able to have a look at. And obviously being our backgrounds of being remote people, then we do have that strong advantage of knowing what works, what doesn't work. A bit of baling twine will fix most things, right?
Yeah. Definitely. Well, I really appreciate the time you took to speak with me today. I could talk to you for a very long time about these topics, no doubt. But of course, our time, as I mentioned before, is quite limited. So thank you very much. And as I've said before, this is an extremely important project. So I wish you all the success in the world.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Appreciate it.
So thanks very much for hanging in there on this lengthy piece of content, but really necessary in order to try to get all four competitors properly recognized. And there are actually 10 total competitors here, so I don't envy the UK Space Agency and the Canadian Space Agency their choice of trying to find out who has the best solution, because I had a chance to interview some very intelligent and capable people, and I'll tell you, all of them seem very, very up to this task. And you may have noticed, of course, the repetitiveness of my questions when it came to Viper, and I'm sure the UK Space Agency wasn't actually anticipating that I was going to talk about Viper so much, but it's extremely important for us to recognize the impact that the cancellation of that program or any program actually has on the future of spaceflight. It doesn't just impact Artemis, it doesn't just impact NASA, JPL, it has an impact on institutions around the world when something that high profile gets canceled, and that's why we need to bring Viper back. But I'd like to thank the UK Space Agency and the Aqualunar Challenge for the opportunity to interview these talented folks. Look forward to seeing what the results of the challenge are. Until next time, stay angry about space.